Welcome to the Wokelandia podcast, where we are exposing the injustice in social justice. We're your hosts, the Back Home Brothers. I'm Caleb.
And I'm Joseph. We are the best and most poorly produced
Which way
podcast
points
YouTube
to
channel.
you?
Yeah.
We're so poorly produced. I don't know which way points to you here.
Yep. Well, that's me. Yeah. We are in the middle of, while Caleb figures out how to point to me.
It's hard. It's hard.
I would say am I to the right of you or to the left of you? That's a good question. I actually think I'm to the left of you.
I'm about as good at pointing on camera as
I would say
House Republicans are at electing a speaker.
There you go. That was good.
Well, that's good. Tie in right there. Yeah.
Though if we are referring to political orientations, I would say I am a notch or two to the left of you. Almost no one would say I am to the left of them, but I'm probably to the left of you, just a little bit.
Yeah, I wondered if we would disagree on this topic or not. That topic maybe we don't disagree on, but the topic we're going to be talking about today, we might have a little more disagreement than normal. Maybe it'll be
we'll find out.
Fun to find out. Yeah, there aren't a lot of people
find out.
To the left of me, I don't suppose, or to the right.
To the right of you.
The right of me.
To the right of you.
Although it depends how you define it.
I mean, because eventually it just comes back around and it's just a different.
And then
the fascists meet somewhere on that circle, right?
The anarchists and fascists become the same thing eventually.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So Caleb, we are, and it is today, January 6th. We should
have a moment of silence
for the near end of democracy that occurred, the worst day since the crucifixion of Jesus, as we are reminded every single year. And actually, it's not every year. I mean, about every day they try to find something
several hours
to say January 6th.
January 6th. Here we are.
It's January 6th. What's happening today is
just as chaotic as 2 years ago.
Is this have we had like 12 votes now for
13? The 13th one just concluded, which actually was different than the 12 before it.
Yeah, and I was actually kind of, for a while I was watching and got interested, and then I stopped being interested.
This was the most interesting one yet.
Well, I'm not disinterested in the outcome, but watching people, my heart goes out to the clerk of the House, who's not supposed to be doing this because there's no speaker. So that poor lady has to be facilitating this, and every time they call for a vote, she's got to call the roll of all 435 members of these of the House of Representatives one at a time, and then they go back and check the votes when they're done. I mean, every single vote takes, I don't know, was it 90 minutes or something like that? So
it's much more secure than votes in many cities around this country right now. Just
true, because you can actually verify, you can check your work to know that the person voted. So maybe there's something to be learned there. Maybe we haven't even gone there, and this is completely not part of the script, but we could start proposing House Speaker votes like they got elected. We can vote for the Speaker like they get elected. We're going to just mail a bunch of ballots out to people, and we're just going to give them a couple weeks to come in, and then we're just going to see what the results are. We aren't going to go bother.
We're not going to check their ID. We're not going to make sure who filled
no IDs. You don't have to prove that you're a member of the House of Representatives, because that would be racist.
You don't want to disenfranchise the people from getting to vote.
That's exactly right. So basically,
here's your ballot. We don't know who filled this out, but it's here, and it says Donald Trump is the new Speaker of the House.
It says that you're a representative. And so if your ballot says that you're a representative, if you are going to attest to being a member of the House of Representatives, we'll let you vote for Speaker.
That's right.
That's an exercise we should probably explore at another day. But for now, and we're going to get to, there are some real good, wokeness appears everywhere, right? Wokelandia is governing everything, and it certainly has made a great appearance this week. We'll get to that. But before we get into just kind of the, I want to discuss what the rogue 20, it's now 20, it started as like 19, and then Byron Donalds defected, and it sounds like, based on the last vote, all but 7 have gone back to the McCarthy camp. And let's talk a bit about why. What's the demands? The headline here is, of course, that Kevin McCarthy is trying to be elected Speaker of the House, and he has failed to get all the Republicans. He has failed to get 218 votes 13 times now.
Yeah. And before we get to the demands part of it, I mean, what kind of led up to that is the last couple of days with voting over and over and over. It's like, why does it have to be McCarthy? Is he the only guy for the job potentially? And the answer to me is no. I don't. Well, there are 200 people 150 people maybe that would be good votes, but the way we've done it for so long is before it all comes around, you kind of coalesce around one candidate and everybody just votes for the candidate. It's a formality, but I don't see what has to be that way. It doesn't bother me so much with what's happening here.
Well, to answer that, you have to have a little understanding of how politics works. And for those who don't know anything about me, I have never been elected to office and probably never will be. But about almost 20 years ago now, I started as a staff attorney in the Washington State Legislature. And so that's when I really started to see inside kind of the sausage factory. And then I worked for a nonprofit that did advocacy work in the legislature. And so I worked I've worked around the political process for most of the last 20 years. And the reason why it has to be McCarthy is because there's all these conventions and people feel like they owe everybody everything. He's been the minority leader of the Republican Party for a long time. I don't know how many years actually right now. But he's been the minority leader, and there is this sense of entitlement that exists in all sorts of ways in the political process, that you bid your time. Once you're the vice chair, if the chair retires, you become the chairman, right? There's this ladder. I'm answering. I'm not, you are thinking like a citizen. I'm telling you how politicians think. And absolutely, Andy McCarthy believes he is entitled to be the Speaker of the House, because until now he has done the things that historically would suggest he becomes the Speaker of the House. He was the leader of the minority when they became the majority. He helped work to get a bunch of them elected. He emphatically believes this is his right, and anyone else who became the Speaker of the House in his place would be stealing it from him.
And that's all nice and well, but what about the idea that when the president is in the White House doing a terrible job on the midterm election, you're supposed to really sweep in with a bunch of wins? And that didn't happen. We got some wins on the conservative side, on the Republican side, but not nearly what we thought. And does McCarthy bear the blame for some of that? I think Mitch McConnell.
Well, none of that mattered. It
matters to me, and it should matter. And that's annoying.
And you just mentioned Mitch McConnell, who is the minority leader in the Senate, right?
He's probably worse in my mind.
Why does he keep being reelected? Why does he keep being reelected? Mitch McConnell is the largest. His PAC is the largest donor to almost every Senate Republican.
Right. And if he doesn't,
we're talking to the tunes of tens of millions of dollars to each one of them. Do you want to know why he's continuously elected as the leader? That's why. Why does Andy McCarthy believe that he has the right to be elected? And why do people vote for him despite, not necessarily agreeing with him on every issue? Because he gives them money. Is he purchasing their votes? I mean, it really depends on how you look at it.
Mitch McConnell's PAC did in Alaska. Got Lisa Murkowski, who annoys me every other week with her votes. She got her in instead of an actual conservative because she plays better with with McConnell. Those names are pretty similar. I just realized. But why do we, I don't know. Why do we put with that? Some people are not putting up with it, or saying, I want to draw a line and get some of this change. And I'm kind of glad about all that, about what these 20 people have been doing to try to, in my opinion, either weaken the position of Speaker of the House. I think it's too strong in the first place. And get other concessions, which you're going to talk about here too.
Well, clearly that's how a very small minority of the Republican caucus in the House is thinking about it. But you asked the question, apparently. Why does it have to be him? This is why, because there's so much history, there's so much convention, there's so much momentum toward this is the way we do this process. You climb the ladder, you pay your dues, you do the right thing for the right people, and eventually it comes back around to you and you get the seat that you want. Not to mention the fact that being Speaker of the House is one of the most powerful jobs in the world.
Right.
And you don't just have like power, you get rich being Speaker of the House because people need you for all sorts of things. What you can do after you've been Speaker of the House, what your speaker fees are, what you can demand as a lobbyist, the kind of boards that you get invited to. I'm telling you, this is why it's the swamp. It's because it's not just about he wants to be powerful and be able to decide where legislation goes. There are so many fringe benefits that are personal and financial and all sorts of other things. And because if you're the Speaker of the House, everybody in America needs you to cooperate. If they want to do anything in Washington, D.C., you have to agree to let it happen. And so every corporation, every pharmaceutical company, every military arms manufacturer, every company in America, if you want to get something done, the Speaker of the House has to cooperate to make that happen. So you are throwing things at them.
But it doesn't.
And that's why
it doesn't have to be that way constitutionally. It has become that way, and it's made that way. And that's one of the things that could be changed right now, like today and tomorrow, is to weaken the Speaker of the House. And I think some Democrats would actually like a weaker Speaker of the House too. This is an area.
Well, and let's get there. We're at the risk of, we are at the introduction to this whole thing, and we risk making this a 3-hour episode, and we can't do that. So here are some of the things that those who are the McCarthy holdouts, with some of the things that they have been looking for concessions. And I don't frankly know where we're at in terms of what he has agreed to and what he has
just in the last hour. There've been several apparently that have happened,
which when people watch this is going to be old news. So we don't know that exactly. But so the first is one concession that I understand McCarthy, that he did give on behalf of somebody else. And this is so sketchy, is stop the Club for Growth from spending money in primaries with safe Republican seats. Now, what is that? Because we're talking, and so much of this, almost all of this, frankly, is so in the weeds politically that many people, they're not going to understand this. But basically, there are Republican districts where going in, where it's going to be a Republican elected, but there's a primary that happens to determine which Republican is going to be on that seat. And what has happened is the conservatives are saying this moderate Club for Growth is spending money against conservatives on behalf of moderates in the primary. So these are seats that they know are going to be Republicans, but the Club for Growth, and they would say McCarthy allied Club for Growth, they are spending money opposing conservative candidates.
Now, fighting. How does he have anything to do with that? Is this his group or something? He doesn't really control.
Not officially. Again, it's all incestuous. I can't tell you exactly why they think that is the issue here, but I'm just telling you that's how this works in these primaries. That is one concession that he's apparently, and I don't know how he can give them, because the problem with this entire conversation is that you're not supposed to be coordinating. Candidates, campaigns, and political action committees are not supposed to be coordinating. Of course, we're not talking about McCarthy's campaign, but at the risk of getting way too much in the weeds on that, which we've probably already done, that's one of the concessions, basically, that these groups seen as moderates by like the Freedom Caucus wing of the House Republican Caucus.
And that's who's holding out on this, is the Freedom Caucus.
They will not spend money in these safe Republican districts against conservative candidates, or really, they're not going to spend any money. So that's one of them.
So that's the opposite of what Mitch McConnell did up in Alaska, where he spent a bunch of money to defeat
against conservative
Republican.
Right. Which is what they've been doing, which is what the holdouts are accusing the Club for Growth of doing, exactly what Mitch McConnell has done in the Senate, which is we're going to go attack all these conservatives because we want people who are much more moderate, more cooperative. They're going to just not do what we're seeing these 20 members of Congress do, right? Yeah. There are problems for those who are in leadership, just trying to maintain business as usual. Another one is they want more conservatives appointed to kind of the A committees, appropriations, energy and commerce, Ways and Means, the Rules Committee. And I'm not even going to bother to explain what the Rules Committee does, but it's essentially the committee, when it comes out of a policy committee, it goes to rules before it goes to the House. And so you have to have enough people on the Rules Committee to pull it from there to the floor so it gets a vote. If you don't have enough conservatives or you don't have people who agree with you on the Rules Committee, it'll never get out of that committee to the floor, so it can't be voted on.
Now, isn't it the case, though, it's not just the Rules Committee. The Speaker of the House is the one who determines if a bill ends up getting a vote or not, just unilaterally. Isn't that normally the case?
Not always. I mean, yes, but members have to pull it from rules to the floor anyway.
And then the Speaker after that has to bring it up for a vote.
Correct.
And perhaps weakening that, I would like to see that where it's not always up to the Speaker to decide everything that gets a vote, because that gives a lot of power to the Speaker. And why do we want to have that much power in one person's hand, whether it's Nancy Pelosi, who I really disliked politically, or Kevin McCarthy, who I actually kind of like a lot politically in a lot of things. I don't want them having that much power, it doesn't seem like. And I guess I don't know enough about it to have a strong opinion as to why this is a good idea, why any conservative would want this idea, or for that matter, why some of the Democrats want that idea. I don't know.
Right.
But I don't like it initially.
To that point, there's another issue that there are certain bills that they want him to promise to bring up for a vote, things on border policy, balancing the budget. McCarthy has taken a lot of heat from the more conservative faction of his caucus. They call it a conference in the House. I keep saying caucus, but they call it the conference. He's taken a lot of heat because of the way he responded to the $1.7 trillion spending package that was thrown, it was pushed through right before Christmas. They think that he did not oppose that nearly as aggressively as he should have. What
is your thought? I got a thought on that too. Go ahead.
And I'm all about balanced budgets, and I think we need to move that direction. No one in Washington, D.C. seems to be interested in that. That's a huge problem, but go ahead.
Yeah, for me, that's probably my biggest issue, is that when Democrats win, the government gets way bigger. And when Republicans are in the majority, the government gets a little bit bigger. And it's like the government is too big. So getting any bigger is too much. When do departments ever get cut? When do employees ever get laid off? When do pensions ever end or not become dependent on defined contribution or defined benefit instead of defined contribution? That never happens. Even when Republicans hold power, it's like, we got to hold out for that. Eventually, this country is going to go bankrupt because you can't continually just spend way beyond your means. And until we have a speaker who's willing to stand up for that and say, no, we're going to negotiate with Democrats on the size of the cuts of government rather than the size of the increase of government, then what are we doing anyway?
Well, you're never going to negotiate with Democrats on the size of the cuts in government, because
you can if you hold the majority.
Well, you're not going to negotiate with them on the size of cuts. You're just going to negotiate against them on the size of the cuts. But the point that you make there,
I'm saying the same thing, right?
Yeah, the point that you make there, I mean, it was Ronald Reagan, right, who said in the 80s that Washington, D.C. has a ton of birthing centers and no cemeteries, right? Bunch of things get born and nothing ever dies. And so that's a longstanding problem. And it is, you're right, it's bankrupting us. And I could very quickly make a list of things that we could do without. I would start with the Department of Education personally,
right,
and destroy that. But I'm sure there's money to be saved otherwise. So specific issues. They also a request that McCarthy would set up a congressional subcommittee devoted to opposing the weaponizing of government. So that a subcommittee addressing the way the FBI and the Justice Department have been responding really kind of since the middle of the Obama administration. I think the Obama administration is really what began that process of using these federal
IRS in particular.
It's the IRS, DOJ, FBI. There's a lot of agencies where there's good reason to be concerned that they primarily have a political agenda that doesn't necessarily serve all the people. It just kind of serves a left-wing perspective and the White House, if the White House happens to share that perspective. Lauren Boebert is one who wants a single, and she's not the only one, wants a single member to be able to bring a motion to vacate the speaker. So one member of Congress could stand up and have a motion to remove the Speaker of the House from being the Speaker of the House. And it
would go to a vote?
Yes. And one person could require that vote, and that could become chaotic. I can understand why you would want more than one. I mean, I just go back to scripture. You want more than one witness when you hear an accusation. Just because one person's annoyed and willing to do that, that could really be.
I think he agreed to 5, though. I think that was a concession he gave a couple of days ago, and so that's not a bad thing. For me, them having less power is more important than the ability to vacate them. But still, I guess I would support that.
Another is, and the last one I think we'll discuss right now, is allowing debate on the floor instead of on the committees. In the course of this, as I've watched more C-SPAN this week than I have in probably the last year. And one of the points that was made is that there has not been an amendment passed on the floor of the House of Representatives in 6 years.
Really?
And I don't know if anybody knows that. All of the legislative work has been happening in the committee, and then it goes to the floor, and then you're expected to vote
up or down.
Up or down, vote for it. So there's no debate. So if you're not on a particular, if you're not on the Energy and Commerce Committee, and so you were not part of the deliberation with this particular bill, once it gets to the floor, you're supposed to have no say. You're not supposed to be able to give any input into what it is. Just vote it up or down. Why is that? That's a relatively new development in Congress. And all of these, things like that, they're just designed to crush debate, which is one of the reasons I think this opposition to McCarthy is kind of refreshing, because they're actually debating something substantive on the floor. They don't,
and they're standing on the floor doing it, and they're not just standing to an empty chamber, which they normally do when they're talking. Nobody hears them, nobody cares. It's just for the voters on C-SPAN. But this is more substantive, a little bit anyway.
So those are some of the demands that are substantive. Now, I think depending on the person that you're talking about, some of them just love the attention. Some of them probably dislike Andy McCarthy personally, and they may not be persuadable. There are trust issues that involve things that I have no way of knowing about. And again, likely a lot of that has to do with campaigns and who got money and who didn't get money, and other things that might have happened in past legislative deliberations where people have a personal axe to grind. But also it's probably worth noting that the Freedom Caucus, it's not the Freedom Caucus that is opposing this. Most of the holdouts are part of the Freedom Caucus, but there are actually a lot of members of the Freedom Caucus who have been voting consistently for McCarthy the whole time. So it's not just the Freedom Caucus. There's factions within that.
But getting some of these concessions is a good thing. And they didn't just go along with it, just go along to get along. Did you say Andy McCarthy a second ago?
I did.
Clarify. Kevin McCarthy.
Kevin McCarthy. Yes. Who is Andy McCarthy? Why do I keep saying Andy McCarthy?
I was thinking Mike McCarthy too. Is Mike McCarthy the Packers coach? The old Packers coach?
He's the Cowboys coach now.
He's the Cowboys coach, Mike McCarthy. Okay.
Former Packers coach, now Cowboys coach. Yes.
Okay, so you're calling him Andy and I'm calling him Mike. Neither one.
But his name is Kevin. And hopefully people will be able to follow that. There's a lot of McCarthys hanging out.
Yeah. Okay.
Anyway,
so we're talking about
Kevin McCarthy.
Thank you. But I think one thing, an interesting perspective on all this, as we're getting, I think, positive changes, is interesting. Like Sean Hannity is a guy I listen to at least a couple times a week. I find him interesting usually. He's very strongly opposed to this going on. And I agree with him 70 or 80% of the time probably, but I don't on this. I don't know why he's so strongly saying this should have happened on the first vote and be in and done. I mean, what are we missing out on? What would we have done that was so danged important the last 3 days that hasn't happened already? I think we're getting positive changes because of these 20 people who are standing up, and I wish more would have, frankly. But it also brings up an interesting difference right now in Democrats and Republicans. Why haven't Democrats done this? Apparently, some of them don't really like how Nancy Pelosi was basically a dictator around there. We don't want that in our country. We don't want that in the White House. We don't want it in the House of Representatives either. But they were very, very united, and the diversity we see is on the Republican side. Yeah. We've got a diversity of thought. We see that in the Supreme Court, for that matter, when the two blocks, the conservative bloc and the liberal bloc, when they break, they tend to break on the conservative side more. And it's not just because it's 6-3. This was back when it was 5-4 and 5-4 the other way. The conservatives, for whatever reason, tend to be more libertarian. And I guess that's part of the deal, where a libertarian is like, nope, I'm doing my own thing. I'm going over here, even though we generally agree. But right now I'm running off here doing something different. And you don't see that as often. You do sometimes, but it's interesting that the diversity is as much as the Democrats like to use that as a buzzword. Diversity, I think, is seen more often on the right than it is on the left politically, at least in the last couple of decades. And we're seeing that right now.
Of course, it depends on what you mean when you say diversity. Now, one
diversity
reason
that really matters.
Ideological diversity, right? Which should be the part that matters.
Ideas.
In Wokelandia, and again, stay in the theme of what we're talking about here. In Wokelandia, the only diversity that matters is how you look. You're expected to be completely monolithic with respect to what you think and what you say. But Caleb, one of the reasons I'm sympathetic, I think, to the holdouts is just because I believe this is risky for them politically. And you ask the question, why do we not see this on the left? And that's the reason why, is they will cut you off at the kneecaps during your next election. They will defund you. They will go to all your donors and they will say you cannot give them any money. And then they will run a primary opponent against you, and you will lose your campaign. It's actually pretty easy to do. They threaten. One of the ways that it works in this game is they will go to every campaign consultant. They will go to every media company, anybody who works in politics, and they'll say, if you do any work for that candidate, you'll never get another contract with the rest of us again. And everyone will walk away from them. It's actually quite easy to cut off a political candidate at the knees.
That's what the commies do. But
this is also how this is how political parties keep people in line. It's because I may not like what Nancy Pelosi is going to do. I may not like what Kevin McCarthy is going to do. But if I don't, there's consequences. And so the fact that and
it's also political consequences while they're in office. They'll lose speakerships.
This has already been
chairmanships, right. And even seats on committees because of this. So
the fact that they are willing to endure that risk makes me like them. Regardless of the substance, I just like people who are not primarily thinking about how is this going to affect my next election, because this is a risk for people, but it could be a risk that leads to positive change that ultimately builds momentum toward that. But Caleb, what it makes me think of is because clearly the Republican Party is different. And I think, honestly, these factions exist in the Democratic Party as well, right? But what we're seeing here is a bit like what we see in parliamentary systems when they're trying to form a government, right?
Yeah.
We have been
3 or 4 or 5 parties.
Or 12, right? Depending on where you are, whether you're in England or in Israel, they got dozens of parties, right? And they don't have any party that claims to have 40 or 50% of the electoral share. And so they get these strange coalitions, sometimes far left, far right, doing exactly what's happening this week, where you go to the prime minister candidate in that case. And right now we're talking about a speaker candidate, they'll say, okay, if you'll do X, Y, and Z for me, we'll vote for you, even though we hate you on all of these other things. And we disagree with that. And so you are forced to, because there are more than 2 parties, if you want to form a government, which requires majority support of Parliament or the Knesset, depending on where you are, you have to build a coalition that is very broad and diverse.
Like Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel, he was out.
That's exactly. And then he's back.
A few months later, he's back because they can't.
And then he's back. Right. And we're not used to that process, but this feels a lot like that, because there's these Freedom Caucus members of the Republican Party, and how many other factions are there? And within the 212 members of the Democratic Caucus, how many ways could you divide that? Next time there's a Democratic majority, will 30, 40 of them be inspired by what they're seeing the Republicans do right now? And they're going to demand concessions before they vote for their speaker. And are we going to see the beginning of the fracturing of these 2 big parties into smaller groups that say, we're not going to vote for a speaker unless you give us X, Y, and Z? Are we starting something new?
And people who are sick of the 2-party system, I don't know that we'll ever have anything other than 2-party system in this country, but that's kind of what that potentially would be. Although it would be hard to see what other kind of alliances could be made. Like, who on the Democrat side would join any of the Republicans, whether it's the moderate Republicans, moderates, obviously, it depends on what you mean, but moderate or the more conservative, like this Freedom Caucus group, would the far left join up with the far right to join? What issue could bring them together? Maybe the issue that we mentioned at the beginning, where you're weakening the power of the speaker. That in and of itself
destabilizing power
could be an issue that they would join around, although they don't want the speaker to do any of the same things. They just want the speaker to be weaker. So that potentially could be an issue they would have common ground on, although they don't right now, it appears, but maybe they could in the future.
I'm just curious to see if this is a moment where we look back on and say, politics as we knew it changed because people decided to make concessions, and they aren't just going to go along to get along. Caleb, we've got to bring up one more issue in our remaining minutes that we teased at the beginning, and this is the woke nature of this. The element of wokeness that we saw really kind of come to the surface, because in all of this debating over whether it should be Kevin McCarthy, the holdouts have been nominating their own candidates, one of whom was Byron Donalds.
Yeah.
And he is like this is now his second
term in, though.
Yeah,
he's new.
There's only a second. So he served 2 years, just got reelected. He's from Florida. He's a Black Republican, which of course makes him controversial because of that. He was nominated to be the Speaker of the House, and those who nominated him wanted to celebrate the fact that at one point there was, because Hakeem Jeffries, who he's the leader of the Democrats, he is also a Black man. And then the Republicans had nominated a Black man, and they wanted to celebrate that. Well,
they're not the same, though.
They're not the same for one important reason. And Cori Bush, bless her heart, Cori is a female member of the House of Representatives, also Black, a Democrat.
She pointed out that they're not the same in a very helpful way.
Yes. And
I think you're about to give that.
She took to Twitter to say that Byron Donalds is not a historic candidate for Speaker. He is a prop. Despite being Black, he supports a policy agenda intent on upholding and perpetuating white supremacy. Dun, 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 dun.
Just like Larry Elder in California, the Black white supremacist.
Like every Black person who does not agree with her on a whole range of policy issues. If you do not agree with her, you're not actually Black. You are a prop.
So your skin color is super important, unless you've got the conservative card in your pocket. Then
she finished by saying his name being in the mix is not progress, it's pathetic. Which again highlights, when we go back to the discussion about diversity, is the Republican Party more diverse than the Democrat Party? I mean, based on what? Are we talking shoe size? Are we talking height? Are we talking like IQ? Are we, But of course, when you say diversity, all you're supposed to think about is the color of people's skins.
Well, and that's all you're supposed to think about until you realize that you disagree with them. And then it doesn't matter at all.
And
or it makes it even worse. And now you're pathetic.
It makes it even worse.
Right. Kevin McCarthy, Mike McCarthy, Andy McCarthy. No, Kevin McCarthy is not pathetic because he's a white guy and it's okay for him to be a conservative loser. But this fellow from Florida, well, he doesn't have that. He doesn't have the right to be a conservative because he is Black and he's supposed to act like it, which means he's supposed to act exactly like the way that all Democrats are supposed to think. And so if you're not, well, then you're pathetic and you definitely should not be ever nominated for Speaker of the House, regardless of the level of power that the Speaker of the House may hold. And that's a position on the far left, the woke position. And oh my gosh, is that ever the most racist thing ever? But it's okay to be racist against that because they're conservatives and it's okay.
And them's the rules. That's Wokelandia. That's also all the time I think we have for today. Like and subscribe.
Yeah, subscribe.
Good to have you with us.
Never say that.
Our audience has actually grown. I mean, crazy. I mean, there's still like 4 people, but to all 4 of you, thank you.
Yeah, well, it was 3, so that's like a
it's like a 25% increase.
25%.
That's exactly right.
So that's remarkable.
That's exactly right.
Keep going, like and subscribe, and you'll exponentially increase the size of this massive rocket.
And every time you do, an angel gets his wings.
Is that how it works?
Yeah, it is actually. Yep.
Well, now you know. Thanks, everybody.
See you next time.